Little girl cleaning office. Windows leaves Millionaire CEO in total shock. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaos, cars honking and people rushing to their destinations. Inside the skyscraper of Reynolds Enterprises, the atmosphere was calm, polished, and intimidating. Employees moved swiftly in the lobby, heads lowered, careful not to draw unnecessary attention. Ethan Reynolds, the Millionaire CEO, was a man of strict discipline, a figure known for his cold demeanor. Every second of his day was planned, every step purposeful. He entered the building with quiet authority, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. Assistants whispered updates at his side, clutching documents nervously, but Ethan dismissed them with a simple glance. His expression was unreadable, his pace steady, his presence commanding silence. He moved into the elevator, choosing to ride alone, as he always did. The mirrored walls reflected his sharp suit, his piercing gaze, and the weight of his reputation. The elevator ascended smoothly, numbers flashing, and Ethan's mind wandered briefly to meetings, contracts, and strategies. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. He believed he had seen it all: success, betrayal, fortune, and failure. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor, and the doors slid open to a silent hallway leading to his private office. His footsteps echoed with authority as he advanced. His secretary greeted him with a nervous, "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," and he replied with nothing more than a curt nod. The massive double doors to his office swung open, and he stepped inside. He expected the stillness, the same order he demanded daily. But today, something was different. The silence carried a strange presence. He set his briefcase on his desk, pausing as his eyes caught movement near the window. He froze, narrowing his gaze. At first, he thought it was Jay, bust, the reflection of light. But no, it was real. A small figure moved with quiet persistence, almost hidden against the towering glass. Ethan's jaw tightened in disbelief. There, inside his private office, was a little girl. She clutched a rag in one hand and a bucket in the other. Standing on her tiptoes, she stretched her arms, scrubbing the glass in circles. Her frame was fragile, dwarfed by the vast windows. Her clothes were old, faded, and torn at the seams. Her shoes looked worn down, hardly fit to protect her small feet. Yet despite her appearance, her eyes shone with determination. She worked intently, as though the task was the most important thing in the world. Ethan stopped in his tracks. He was a man rarely surprised, yet here he was, stunned into silence. His office had been breached, not by competitors or intruders, but by a child. He thought of calling security immediately, but something made him pause. The girl had not noticed him yet. The faint squeak of the rag against glass filled the air, breaking the silence. Droplets of water slid down the window, catching rays of sunlight. She dipped her rag back into the bucket, squeezed it with tiny hands, and continued cleaning. Ethan's eyes studied her carefully. Her fingers were red and rough, clearly used to work not meant for a child. Her movements were clumsy but persistent, her balance wavering as she stretched higher. She sighed softly, brushed strands of hair from her face, then pressed on again. Ethan felt an unusual sensation stir inside him, something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with discomfort. He noticed the seriousness etched across her young face. There was no trace of playfulness, no sign of childhood innocence. Instead, her expression carried the weight of responsibility, far heavier than her small shoulders deserved. The sight unsettled him. The office, once a cold space of power and silence, he suddenly felt alive with the sound of her effort. He shifted slightly, his shoes making a faint sound, yet she still didn't notice. He thought again of calling security, demanding answers, but the thought lingered and faded. Instead, he stood frozen, watching. His gaze flickered from her trembling hands to her determined eyes. She stretched further, nearly slipping, and Ethan instinctively leaned forward as though ready to catch her. Something in him resisted the urge to interrupt. His chest tightened and his mind filled with questions. Who was she? Why was she here? Who allowed this? More importantly, Why was she working with such relentless focus in his office of all places? For a man who prided himself on having seen everything, this was a moment he could not understand. He felt strangely shaken, his world disturbed by the fragile presence of a little girl wiping his windows as though her life depended on it. Ethan's stillness finally broke. He cleared his throat, his deep voice filling the vast office. The little girl startled, her rag slipping from her hand and dropping into the bucket with a splash. Slowly, almost fearfully, she turned toward him. Her wide eyes met his, filled with both innocence and alarm. Ethan stepped closer, his tone softer than anyone in the building had ever heard him use. "Why are you here, little one?" he asked, his words careful, almost cautious, as though afraid she might vanish if he spoke too harshly. For a moment, silence hung between them. The girl lowered her gaze, fidgeting with her fingers. Finally, in a voice fragile yet brave, she whispered, "I'm cleaning. I have to earn money for my mom." Ethan felt his chest tighten as the words settled over him. The girl raised her eyes again, shimmering with unshed tears. "She's sick," she added, her voice cracking as though the admission itself carried unbearable weight. Ethan had heard countless excuses from employees, countless stories of hardship used to gain sympathy, but this felt different. This was no excuse. Nay, performance. It was raw, it was real, and it pierced through the cold armor he had built around himself. His lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in years, he found himself speechless. The door to his office swung open abruptly, and two security guards rushed in. Their heavy footsteps echoed sharply, breaking the fragile moment. "Sir, we received a report of an intruder," one of them began, but Ethan lifted a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His eyes never left the girl. The guards exchanged confused glances, waiting for orders, their hands hovering near their radios. Ethan shook his head firmly. "Stand down. Leave us." The guards hesitated. Never before had they seen their boss entertain anyone in his office without strict protocol, let alone a child. But Ethan's tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, they stepped back and exited, closing the doors behind them. Silence fell again, heavier than before. The girl shifted uncomfortably, her small frame looking even smaller in the vast room. She clutched the hem of her shirt nervously, unsure if she was in trouble. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his chin, studying her. The lines of power and wealth that defined his office seemed to vanish in that moment. All he could see was a child carrying the burdens of an adult. He moved closer, careful not to startle her. His shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, but his voice remained gentle. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, her lips pressing together, then answered, "Lila." The name floated in the air, fragile yet strong. Ethan repeated it quietly under his breath, as if testing how it felt to speak it aloud. Lila's eyes darted to the bucket on the floor. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I just needed to earn something, even a little. Anything to buy medicine for my mom." Ethan felt something stir inside him, an ache he thought he had long buried. He studied her face, the determination shadowed by fear, the bravery barely holding back tears. He wanted to ask more, to press for details, but he stopped himself. There was a fragility here he didn't want to break. He leaned slightly on his desk, keeping his posture calm, his gaze steady but no longer intimidating. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, though his tone lacked the harshness it once carried. "This is no place for a child." Lila lowered her head, whispering, "I know, but no one else would let me work." The words struck Ethan deeper than she could know. He had built an empire on discipline, on driving people to their limits, but he had forgotten what desperation looked like. In this small girl's voice, he heard echoes of his own past struggles. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He adjusted his tie, trying to disguise the flicker of emotion crossing his face. The room grew still again, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound. Lila's eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. Ethan, who had been called ruthless, unfeeling and untouchable, felt a crack in his armor. He didn't know why, but he wanted to hear everything she had to say. He wanted to understand. The silence stretched between them until Ethan gently repeated her name, almost as if urging her to go on. Lila clasped her hands tightly, her small knuckles turning white, as though summoning the courage to reveal the weight she carried. Her eyes flickered upward, meeting his with hesitation, then falling again to the floor. "My dad," she began, her voice trembling. "He left us a long time ago. He never came back." Ethan felt his jaw tighten, the words hitting harder than he expected. Lila swallowed, her voice growing smaller but steady. "It's just me and my mum now. She used to work all day, every day. She tried so hard to keep us okay." She paused, her tiny shoulders lifting with a shaky breath. "But then she got sick, really sick." Her words trailed into the still air, filling the office, with a heaviness Ethan had not known in years. She tugged nervously at the rag still clutched in her hand, twisting it as though wringing her pain into its damp threads. "We didn't have much before," she whispered, "but now we have even less. Some nights, there isn't even food." Her confession pierced the pristine stillness of the office. The walls, the glass, the shining desk, all symbols of power, suddenly felt like hollow shells compared to the truth pouring out of her. Lila lifted her chin slightly, her voice trembling but determined. "That's why I try to work. I clean windows, I sweep halls, I do whatever people let me do. Most of the time they don't even notice me." The strength in her small voice astonished Ethan. He had seen grown men crumble under the weight of less, yet here stood a girl of barely 10 years, refusing to surrender to despair. Ethan's eyes softened, though his face remained composed. Inside, a storm of emotions stirred. He remembered long nights in his youth, when hunger clawed at his stomach, when his hands ached from odd jobs that paid too little, when he too wondered if survival was even possible. He had buried those memories under layers of success, but now, with every word Lila spoke, they surfaced like ghosts. Her pain was a mirror of his own forgotten past. He thought of the stranger who once handed him food when he had nothing, of the teacher who quietly paid his school fee when his family couldn't. Those small acts of kindness had planted seeds that shaped his life. Without them, he would never have reached the heights he now stood upon. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. He leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Lila, as if trying to reconcile the world he now commanded with the world she described. Lila's voice wavered, but she pushed forward, her words spilling like truths she had never dared to share with anyone before. "Sometimes I wish I could just be like other kids, go to school, play, but I can't. Mom needs me. If I don't help, we'll lose everything." She looked down at her scuffed shoes, her expression caught between shame and pride. Ethan swallowed hard, an unfamiliar tightness pressing in his chest. He studied the way her small hands clenched, the way her thin frame trembled as though carrying a weight too large for her age. He thought of the many people he had fired over the years for failing his expectations, and he wondered what expectations had been placed upon this child. She should have been running freely in a playground, not scrubbing glass in a CEO's office. The realization settled heavily on him. She had not come into his world to disrupt it. She had come because survival had left her no choice. And suddenly, the empire he had built, the fortune he had amassed, seemed meaningless compared to the resilience of one small girl fighting for her mother. The office clock ticked softly, each second stretching longer than the last. Lila's words lingered in the air, painting vivid images Ethan could not ignore. An abandoned home, a sick mother, a child working in silence where no one cared to look. Ethan had believed his past struggles had hardened him beyond compassion, but the sight of Lila's determined face told him otherwise. He knew this feeling. It was the memory of hunger, of loneliness, of carrying burdens that should never belong to a child. And in her story, he found fragments of his own, long hidden but never truly forgotten. Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, his gaze steady on the little girl before him. Something inside him shifted, a weight he had not expected pressing down on his chest. He could have easily dismissed her, could have called the guards back in, could have ended the interruption with one cold command, but instead he found himself leaning forward, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you go to school?" The question hung in the air, simple yet heavy with meaning. Lila's eyes flickered, stood up to meet his before falling again, her fingers twisting nervously around the rag she still held. She shook her head, a small, almost ashamed movement. "Not anymore," she admitted, her voice fragile but firm. "I can't. I need to help Mom." The words stung sharper than he anticipated, lodging deep inside him. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, a rare and unwelcome sensation that caught him off guard. The silence that followed was thick, filled only by the quiet hum of the city outside the tall windows. Ethan had built his life around deadlines, numbers, and profits. Every moment calculated, every decision weighed in terms of gain and loss. Yet here was a child standing in his office, revealing that the price of survival was her stolen childhood. His mind drifted to boardrooms filled with powerful men who argued over millions as though it were nothing, and then back to Lila, who sacrificed school and play for the chance to earn a few coins. The contrast made his chest tighten. For the first time in years, the empire he had built seemed small compared to the enormity of the choice this little girl had been forced to make. Ethan leaned back slightly, his usually sharp posture softening, his hands clasping together as if to ground himself. He studied her carefully, noticing the way her lips pressed together, the way she stood firm, despite the trembling in her small frame. She did not ask for pity. She did not complain. She simply stated her truth with the quiet strength of someone far older than her years. The realization unsettled him deeply. He had known grown executives who cowered under pressure, yet this child faced him with courage. He felt his mind racing, searching for words, but everything that came to him felt inadequate. Instead, he found himself listening to the faint sounds around them, the ticking clock, the distant murmur of traffic, the uneven breath of a girl who had already seen too much of life's cruelty. His gaze shifted to the stack of documents waiting on his desk, contracts worth millions, signatures that could change the future of his company, and yet none of it seemed to matter in that moment. The weight of deals and profits melted away, replaced by the undeniable truth standing before him. Childhood lost to responsibility. Ethan rubbed his temples slowly, a gesture no one in his company had ever seen. He was known for decisiveness, for never showing weakness, for carrying the image of a man unshaken. But now, alone in the presence of a little girl with worn shoes and determined eyes, he felt fragile. He thought of his own childhood, not in detail, but in the shape of hunger, the echo of long nights, the memory of sacrifice. He had buried it all beneath layers of wealth and success, convincing himself it no longer mattered. Yet here it was, alive again in the story of this child. He studied Lila once more, and his heart gave an involuntary ache. She should have been in a classroom, her hands ink-stained from writing, her mind filled with lessons and dreams. Instead, those same hands were raw from scrubbing, her mind consumed with worry for her mother. Ethan realized, with a heaviness he could not shake, that she was not just cleaning windows. She was cleaning away the remnants of her own childhood, piece by piece. The thought left him quiet, humbled in a way he had never experienced before. For a long moment, he simply let the silence settle. He could feel the enormity of the truth pressing against him, challenging the values he had lived by for decades. Deals, profits, deadlines. All the things that had once defined his purpose suddenly seemed pale in comparison to the courage of a little girl who had chosen survival over dreams. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Ethan Reynolds questioned whether he had truly understood what mattered. The weight of Lila's words lingered with Ethan long after she left his office, echoing in his mind like a quiet storm. For the first time in years, his she duel meant nothing to him. Meetings were postponed, calls ignored, contracts left unsigned. Instead, he found himself seated in the back of his car, staring out the tinted window as the city rushed past. His driver glanced at him through the mirror, surprised by the unusual silence, but dared not speak. Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere, carried back to the image of a child with weary eyes and a voice too heavy for her age. That image compelled him forward, away from boardrooms and skyscrapers, into a part of the city he hadn't seen in decades. The streets narrowed, buildings faded, and the polished glow of wealth gave way to cracked sidewalks and peeling paint. Ethan's chest tightened with each turn, memories stirring of nights when he too had walked streets like these. At last, the car slowed before a small, run-down apartment building. Ethan stepped out, his presence almost foreign in the quiet neighborhood, his suit and shoes too sharp for such surroundings. Yet he felt strangely at home, as though drawn back into a world he thought he had left behind. Climbing the narrow staircase, he reached the door Lila had described. It was thin, its paint chipped, its handle loose from years of wear. He knocked gently, and after a pause, the door creaked open. Lila's mother stood there, frail and pale, her tired eyes widening in shock at the sight of the man before her. She tried to steady herself against the frame, embarrassed by her condition. Lila rushed forward from inside, her voice soft and anxious. "This is Mr. Reynolds, Mom." The woman's face flushed with shame as she realized why her daughter had been cleaning. She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling with apology. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was doing this. She shouldn't have been working." Her words carried both guilt and despair, the sound of a mother who had tried her best but fallen short. Ethan lifted a hand, gently, silencing her worries before they could grow heavier. "From today," he said firmly, his voice steady yet warm, "you will never have to worry again." The words hung in the small room, heavier than gold. Lila's mother blinked in disbelief, uncertain if she had heard him correctly. Lila herself froze, clutching her mother's arm, her wide eyes filled with a cautious hope she had not dared to feel in so long. Ethan stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the sparse furniture, the worn blankets, the signs of struggle etched into every corner of the tiny home. He felt an ache in his chest, a quiet fury at the unfairness of it all. Without hesitation, he made arrangements that very day. Calls were placed, instructions given, doors opened that had long been shut to this family. Medical treatment was secured for Lila's mother, doctors arriving with care and medicines she desperately needed. For the first time in months, the woman felt the weight lift from her frail body, replaced by relief she could hardly express. Meanwhile, Ethan ensured Lila was enrolled in school. Papers were signed quickly, tuition covered in full, supplies and uniforms provided without question. The thought of her sitting in a classroom, learning and laughing like other children, brought an unfamiliar warmth to Ethan's heart. But he didn't stop there. He arranged part-time assistance for their living expenses, enough to keep the home stable without stripping Lila's mother of dignity. It was not charity. It was a bridge toward a life they deserved. The days that followed brought a transformation. Lila's smile grew brighter, her steps lighter, her laughter beginning to return. Her mother's health improved steadily under proper care, her face regaining color, her eyes regaining hope. Ethan visited often, quietly at first, not as a powerful CEO, but as someone who had chosen to care. In those visits, something unexpected stirred in him. The mansion he once thought was nothing more than cold walls and empty halls began to feel different. It was no longer just a fortress of wealth. It became a place filled with purpose. The laughter of a child echoed in his mind, even when she wasn't there, and the gratitude in a mother's eyes reminded him of everything he had once needed himself. For years, Ethan had lived surrounded by riches but untouched by warmth. Now, with every step he took toward helping Lila and her mother, he felt a new sense of belonging, a renewal of something he thought he had lost forever. For the first time in decades, his heart beat not just for business, but for people. And in that realization, he discovered that true wealth was not in the numbers that filled his accounts, but in the hope he could restore in others. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of Ethan's life shifted in ways he could never have predicted. The man who once measured his days in meetings and profits now found himself waiting outside a modest school, his eyes searching for a small figure he had come to cherish. When Lila appeared, her face glowing with excitement, Ethan felt something stir deep inside him. She carried her books with pride, her steps light as though the burdens of her past had finally loosened their grip. Pausing at the gate, she looked back and spotted him standing by his car. A radiant smile spread across her face, and she lifted her hand in a wave so genuine that Ethan felt his chest tighten with warmth. He raised his hand in return, his heart swelling with a sense of joy he had not known in years. That simple gesture carried more meaning than any business deal he had ever signed, for in that moment he understood that success was not measured in wealth, but in the lives touched by kindness. Each day, as he watched her walk toward a future filled with promise, Ethan reflected on the man he used to be. Cold, distant, driven only by ambition, he had built empires but lived in isolation. Yet now, standing in the presence of a child's gratitude, he realized how empty those victories had been. Lila had not only changed her own destiny, she had awakened something within him that he had long forgotten. He began to see the world with different eyes. The grandeur of his office no longer impressed him as it once had. The luxury cars, the endless boardrooms, the towering skyscrapers, all of it seemed hollow compared to the simple joy of knowing he had made a difference. In quiet moments, he remembered the very first morning he had seen her in his office, struggling to clean windows far too big for her small hands. That image, once shocking, had become a turning point, the beginning of a transformation that reshaped his entire being. Ethan no longer viewed her as just a child in need. He saw her as a reminder of resilience, a mirror of the boy he once was, and a symbol of the second chance life had given him. The more he spent time with Lila and her mother, the more he found his heart opening. Compassion replaced indifference, warmth replaced coldness, and joy replaced the constant hunger for more wealth. His staff noticed the change too. Where once their boss had been stern and untouchable, he now greeted them with patience and understanding. Meetings became less about profit margins and more about creating opportunities that uplifted lives. Philanthropy, once just a formality to maintain appearances, became his true passion. He launched initiatives to help underprivileged families, ensuring that no child would be forced to trade education for survival. Every effort he made was a quiet tribute to Lila, the little girl who had unknowingly reminded him of what it meant to live with purpose. At night, his mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the gentle hum of life. Ethan would sometimes sit in his study, not with contracts or ledgers, but with drawings Lila had given him. Small sketches of flowers, houses, and smiling faces that seemed more valuable than any stock certificate. He marveled at how far she had come in just a short time, and how far he himself had traveled on a journey of the heart. The walls that had once seemed like a prison of wealth now felt like the foundation of a home. For the first time in years, he was not afraid of silence, because silence was no longer emptiness, it was peace. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's transformation became clear to all who knew him. He was no longer defined by the ruthless precision of a millionaire CEO, but by the compassion of a man who had rediscovered his humanity. He carried himself differently, spoke with gentleness, and looked at people not as resources, but as souls with stories. The ripple of change spread outward, touching not only his company but also the countless lives his generosity began to support. Yet no accolade or recognition compared to the simple joy he felt every morning, standing outside that school, waiting for Lila to arrive. One crisp morning, as she waved back at him with that same unguarded smile, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized that this was what he had been searching for all along, not wealth, not prestige, but connection. The little girl, who had once been cleaning his windows, had given him the greatest gift of all, the chance to live not for himself, but for others. In her laughter, in her courage, in her dreams, he had found redemption. The man who had been left speechless by a child's quiet determination was no longer the same. Ethan Reynolds, once known for his cold heart, had been forever changed. And as he turned away from the school that day, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, he knew that the legacy he would leave behind would not be his fortune or his empire, but the love, compassion, and hope he had chosen to nurture. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not as a CEO, but as a man who had discovered the true meaning of wealth,